Hello, everyone out there. I'm very happy to have a great audience with us again today, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar. My name is Abby Bauer, and I am an associate editor for Hoards Dairyman magazine. I'd like to thank you once again for joining us today for our webinar, which is titled The Feed Supply, the Quality Cards We've Been Dealt. This presentation will focus on the harvest season, and we'll touch on yields, pricing, quality, and feed availability. We will also talk a little bit about some feeding considerations to make during these challenging financial times. We are fortunate to have a duo of speakers today. One of them is also my regular co-host, Mike Hutjens, with the University of Illinois. Mike is originally from Wisconsin and graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison before working for University of Minnesota Extension. From there, he headed slightly south to Illinois, where he's been working at the university since 1979. He travels extensively, talking to audiences all around the world about dairy cattle nutrition. Our second speaker is Mike Rankin, the managing editor of Hay and Forage Grower magazine. Mike earned his master's degree from Iowa State University. After spending some time working on a dairy farm, he joined University of Wisconsin Extension as a crops and soils agent in Fond du Lac County. After serving the agricultural community there for 27 years, he joined our team to become the managing editor of Hay and Forage Grower, which is produced here in our office in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. Hoards Dairyman and University of Illinois have been co-hosting these presentations since 2011. Behind the scenes, Jim Baltz at the University of Illinois and our Hoards Dairyman online media manager, Patty Hurchin, keep everything running smoothly. This month's webinar is sponsored by Kuhn, and you'll see their logo on the screen. Kuhn is an agricultural machinery manufacturer in North America, and we are very pleased to have their support of this program. For anyone that's listening to the live presentation, you have access to the slides as PDFs, and those can be printed from your printer. That handout can be found on the webinar toolbar. If you go down to the bottom, second from the bottom section, it says handouts. And right there is where you can click on the PDFs to print them if you would like to follow along. Mike and Mike, I'd like to welcome you both to the webinar, and we all look forward to hearing your presentation.
Well, very good. I'm going to lead off here. This is Mike Hutjens, and you'll be able to pick up the differences in our voices as we go through. It's a team teaching webinar, and we'll have hopefully a good webinar for you here this afternoon or this morning, depending where you're living. This is kind of the quick outline. What's going to happen here? A quick overview on economics. Then Mike Rankin is going to join us with some of the agronomic aspects. I'll finish up on doing some things, look at forage quality there, and then some forage tools, and finally economic consideration. So that's kind of the marching orders that we have. So here we go. We'll go through it very quickly. A nice visual that Jim Baltz put together looking at what's happening in the dairy industry, and not a lot of surprises here. You can see that we're now starting the 5th year of what we would call low milk prices, and you can see September butterfat still becomes the kingpin here at $2.54 a pound. Milk protein, we're pleased to see it come up about 40 cents in the last month, so that kind of goes there. So that's not good news, and Mike, it doesn't get any better here. We look at heifer enterprises. You can see this is not a profit center anymore. In fact, some people would argue $1,200 will buy you a pretty fancy heifer there. Next of all, cull cows are modestly lower at this stage of the game. We can remember back when we could cull a cow and buy a replacement heifer for the same price. And of course, the third leg of that stool are bull calves, and they can be quite low, and surprisingly, even heifer calves are lower than bull calves. You look at some of the Midwest and Eastern sale barn results as far as that goes. So certainly challenging times, and we're going to look quickly at our crop outlook as far as that goes. Unfortunately, this is not parts of Wisconsin and Missouri and places like that, because this is some beautiful corn here. This could come actually from Illinois, I guess, and it is an Illinois picture that Jim Baltz has taken. A lot of things, and we were talking a bit earlier, and Mike's going to zero in on these a little bit more. A lot of things have happened this last winter, spring, and fall, and so we're off and running. Never a common year. In fact, we had some drought here in Illinois. It cost a couple of our farmers here in central Illinois 30 or 40 a bushel to the acre because they didn't get the timely rain. And we were just talking last night west of Illinois here, or Champaign, they got 2.5 inches of rain. It sounds like Wisconsin got some more, which we really didn't need as well. So the feed situation, Mike, we'll let you handle that one a bit later in just a few minutes here, but there is good quality and poor quality hay out there. And it looks like, according to our computer runs, about a $70 spread between high quality and low quality hay. Each of you have to calculate the ways of putting value on your forage crop. One is use RFQ, and what I did in this example, if hay is $185 a ton, you divide it by 170 RFQ points, that ends up being $1.09. Now, I'm not sure that's true in California or Pennsylvania or Florida, but certainly that's another way to look at that in terms of the value of quality feed. Remember that number here. It'll become important here in about 15 minutes. A soybean meal, quite modest in price, below $330 a ton. Some people are going to lock in on that. Some people expect if it gets below 300, you should buy it all. Shell corn, we can see that is also quite economically priced. In fact, some colleagues up in Minnesota say that corn in Minnesota was below $3 a bushel coming out of the field. And this year, fuzzy cotton seed's a good price. And so maybe we need to be thinking, should we be locking some of these feeds in at today's prices with today's milk outlook as we have? And we'll talk a little bit about byproduct feeds here in just a minute. I thought I'd give you a quick overview in Illinois. Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio has got some really good crops out there. This is Illinois data. I couldn't capture any national data, Mike. Maybe you saw that. But here in Illinois, the USDA has pegged at 214 bushels per acre, and we've got fields running at 260 to 270 as far as that goes. A release that came across my desk on Friday said about 57% or almost 60% of the corn is going to be stored on farm. Farmers aren't going to sell it. They're going to sit on it unless they have to sell it to make payments or whatever the case is going to be. Soybean yields, 66 bushel to the acre by USDA. This is up 17% from last year. So we really got some big yields there as well. And we just saw a release this morning that our export sales of soybeans are down 28% from normal. So certainly that's having an impact. So we're ready to go, and you have a polling question, and you can only pick one, or you can pick more than one. Oh, Jim says we can pick more than one. Here are your choices. And I think it's an interesting choice this year, Mike. Will you be changing your feeding program this year? And the reason we asked that question, or I asked that question, is we're going to have cheap corn. We're going to see some high quality corn silage around the United States. We're going to see some good quality legume and grasses this year, and in some cases, 5th and 6th cuttings here in the Midwest. Cottonseed is going to be a good price. And soybeans, you could feed them if you don't want to sell them for $8.50 a bushel. And in many cases, these are on the farm, so it's not an out-of-pocket cost, and that's somewhat attractive as well. So the polls are opening here, and we've got about 27% in, and people are thinking here, and it's slowly coming in here. We're going to give you another 20 seconds. Abby, are you going to vote here?
Well, I'm just curious to see what people say. It seems like it'll depend where you're located. I mean, I think you mentioned here in the Midwest, things are awfully wet right now, and that certainly could impact the amount of corn silage or grain or soybeans that are available to specific farmers. So let's see what people say.
And there's lots of excitement about tar spots, and maybe that'll come up in the Q&A period as well, and some of the other risks that these crops could face. So let's go and close this, Jim, and share it. Enough time. We had about 60% of the vote coming in, and looks like we've got 30% saying feeding more corn grain, 54% more corn silage, 35% more legume grass, 11% will feed more fuzzy cottonseed, and surprising to me at least, only 8% are going to maybe look at moving into using the soybean seed. I thought we might catch a little bit more of that one, then we did not get that. So let's look at the state of forages. And Mike, I think this is yours to run with.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And we'll try to get through this fairly quickly. I wanted to just give, to start out with here, an overview of where we're at in terms of forages, and one of the things that we like to look at is USDA's May 1st hay stock report. And as we look at this graph, you can tell that in 2018, those hay stocks dropped year over year about 36%. Now, this is only dry hay, so it doesn't include anything that's maybe in the form of haylage or high moisture feed. but nevertheless, still a fairly significant drop. And as we look back all the way back to 2000 there, the third lowest hay stocks that we had going into this this growing season. And you might ask, you know, why is that the case? Well, for one thing, Mike mentioned it. You know, we had really a lot of snow come in late April. It was a cold spring in much of the U.S. And so people were, you know, they were feeding hay much later into the spring than what they normally would do. So that was part of that picture. And we're also saw a lot more feeding of hay than what we maybe seen in the past, and that could be just related to growing beef and dairy herds in the U.S. And this hay stocks picture, there were some states that were really down. Texas was down 63%, Missouri down 61%. California down 58%, and Wisconsin down 41%. So going into this growing season, there certainly wasn't as much hay around, making this pretty important in terms of replenishing some of those stocks. All right, let's take a look at hay prices, and is just to kind of make a comparison. This is USDA's average alfalfa hay price for August. That's the latest one that's available. And a couple of things that we see here fairly easily, looking at 2018 compared to 1 year ago when we had this seminar. Average hay price across all qualities is up about $30 a ton. It was $147 a year ago. It's $177 in 2018. If you're selling alfalfa hay, I guess you look at that as a good thing. If you're buying alfalfa hay, you look at that as a bad thing. And as we look at kind of what some of those prices currently are in, say, California, if you're looking at premium, supreme kind of quality, you're talking about $250 to $275 delivered. And that price actually for that quality hay isn't a whole lot different for California than it was 1 year ago. What's interesting is the lower quality hay is $20 more or so a ton, and in some cases even greater than that than it was 1 year ago today. So the lower quality hay has actually gained a little more value as people look at the price of the higher quality stuff. Here in the Midwest, talking to some Dairyman, 200 to 250 delivered in is about what they're seeing. So if we look at this same data only across the year by month, and we look at 2017, which are the orange bars, you can see that this hay price has come up dramatically in 2018. From January of this year, it continued to go up, peaked out in May, which is pretty typical. Usually April and May is when you'll find your highest hay prices. And this is reflective, I think, of that hay stocks number that we noted earlier being 36% lower. It's kind of held its own. We do see it come down somewhat through the summer. And currently again sitting at $177 a ton, but significantly higher value than what we saw a year ago. Couple big picture type things here. Looking at USDA reports on acreage in 2018, they predict that's going to be up 5% compared to last year. About 788,000 acres. We'll see what happens. That's merely a forecast at this point. Slow milk price rebound, which we had hoped would be a little better in 2018. coupled with lower export demand that we'll talk about here in a second, have kind of moderated hay prices. So I guess on the one hand, hay prices are definitely higher this year than last year. On the other hand, they aren't continuing to go high. They're just kind of holding their own right at the moment. A lot of rainfall in some areas, a lack of rainfall in others have probably been the big stories. And of course, depending upon where you live, it's kind of a localized thing as to which one of those caused you the most issues in 2018. A few words on alfalfa exports. Now, this is a real big deal in the West, not so much in the East, but clearly alfalfa that doesn't go somewhere else stays here in the country, and that impacts the price of hay, especially for our friends in the Western states. We're looking at U.S. alfalfa exports here in the graph through 2017, and you can see that China has just exploded in the amount of hay that they bring in from the United States, and they're followed by Japan, which just kind of holds their own every year. In 2018, exports are trending lower. They're actually down about 10%. China is down 19% from January through July, and that could get worse with if they don't get this tariff situation figured out. One of the things that China did was put about a 25% tariff on alfalfa hay. So as you can imagine, they may be looking elsewhere. Saudi Arabia is a growing market. They were up 39% in 2018 so far. That country is just shutting off the water for alfalfa production. So a lot of their production is being brought in. And we've talked in previous years about the fact that they actually are buying land in places like Southern California, in the Imperial Valley and Arizona, and actually producing their own hay here and shipping it over there. The UAE is down about 56% this year. As we look at the weather and the kind of growing season that we did have, and the reason for a lot of the problems that have been encountered, I'm looking at a precipitation graph here. This is June through August. And you can see a lot of the Midwest and Northeast extremely wet. And then as we go out west, more dry weather. But the poor folks in Pennsylvania here have had some record wet weather this particular growing season. And I think overall, at least in the Midwest and Northeast, most people would suggest that this was a wet growing season. And again, mixed bag, wet or dry, and this made it tough growing some quality alfalfa and harvesting quality alfalfa. One state that we should point out is Missouri. I don't know if, Mike, if they just don't go to church as much, but boy, I'll tell you what, they had a dry year in Missouri this year, and eastern Kansas as well, to the point where some of their corn just burnt up, relatively little pasture and forage available in that state. Wildfires and hurricanes. We know about the recent hurricane, and you might say, well, how do wildfires impact forage production? In talking to a lot of people out west, they were telling me that that haze from those wildfires were delaying getting hay dry, alfalfa hay dry, by 4 or 5 days. So it had a significant drying impact on that hay out west. And so that's where that comes into play. And as we've talked about, corn silage, pretty much a mixed bag depending upon where you live. Quickly, if you're looking at, again, looking at June through August, if you're a blue color here, that means you were wetter than normal. If you're one of these tan or brown colors, that means you were drier than normal. And there was, this is kind of where the state ranked in the 124 years of keeping such records. So from June through August, Pennsylvania had their wettest period, wettest year for that period of any since records have started to be taken, and many other states right up there throughout the Midwest. Here we have Indiana at 116, and then as we go out west, we're noticing pretty dry years. I was out in California last month, or in August, I should say, for corn silage harvest. And I had a guy tell me that Fresno during July, Fresno, California, I think there were 3 days where the temperature didn't hit triple digits. So pretty hot and dry out there this summer. Talked about some of these storms that went through right as this corn was ready to cut for silage here through Wisconsin. This is actually a picture of a cornfield in Wisconsin after one of those storms went through, just laying flat on the ground. They got this corn harvested, but it was really tough. They had to go one direction, and it was slow going. And September for getting a corn silage harvested, again, some really wet areas. As you look at these pink and red colors, you can see northeast Iowa, southern Wisconsin, southern Minnesota, all the way through kind of this mid-south and northeast region. Of course, some of this in September was a result of that those hurricane rains. But boy, if you had corn silage to get off, that was tough going. And you know, there'll be some ramifications from that I think Mike will talk about a little bit later. In terms of drought, if we're just here, I've got the drought map on for September 25th, 2018, compared to 1 year ago. And you can see that a year ago, we were talking pretty dry weather here in the Midwest. A lot of that has gone away. There was a significant drought in the upper plains last year. A lot of that has been rectified. Now the big area of drought is here in the lower plains and out west in California. Also looking at Oregon is very dry here of late. So that's how the two situations compare. I think for the most part in the Midwest and the Northeast, too much rain has been the big story. All right, so what we're hearing here to wrap up, everything from wet to dry, and that's almost becoming a normal story, I guess. I think hay inventories are going to rebound, but a lot of that's going to be pretty average quality stuff. And corn silage yields were excellent for the most part, if you could get it off. This picture that you see in the slide here was from out in California. And you can see that looks like pretty decent corn. That corn out there was running anywhere from 35 to 40 ton per acre. They cut it pretty low out there compared to a lot of places here in the Midwest, but should be plenty of feed. If you are in some of these wet areas, diseases, mycotoxins, some of those could be a bit of an issue. Right now, in terms of hay buying and selling, dairies are kind of hesitant to buy high-priced hay until milk prices improve, and hay producers are hesitant to sell it at lower prices. So kind of a stalemate. Dairy Expo this year, last week, heard a lot of people talking about putting in or had put in reduced lignin alfalfa. So that's gaining acres, and I think that's for the most part a pretty good decision. A lot more baleage being put up across the country. That's another trend we're starting to see, both on dairy and beef farms for that matter. And it just gets them away from having to get that hay all the way dry. One of the interesting things that I've run into a couple of producers on this summer, and I also know there's a lot of research in this area as well, is the fact that people are trying to establish their alfalfa under their corn crop. A little risky in dry years, but when you do get moisture, they're showing some success. I'm not going to stand here or sit here in this case and tell you that that's what you should do, but it's something to keep an eye on down the road as we move through some of the research on that. California dairies continue to feed less alfalfa than they ever have. It's still at around 7 pounds of dry matter per cow for Holsteins. The only thing I would say is that's a pretty similar number to last year, so it didn't go down any or much year after year. And if you are interested in hay prices, we do put out eHay Weekly, and that comes out every Tuesday morning. And we do report hay prices from various states around the country. And if you don't get that, you can subscribe. It's no charge at hayandforage.com. So, Mike, that's a quick run through. And with that, we'll let you take over the helm.
Well, very good, Mike. Excellent. And we have a couple of questions that came in that we'll be asking you a bit later. Let's then go to part 2 of our webinar today, and that's looking at forage quality and some of the numbers for this year. I want to very quickly recognize 3 labs who have been very helpful here. Cumberland Valley Analytical Services, Rock River Labs, and Dairyland Labs all provided some data here. I selected that data. Hopefully it'll give you a bit of a look to see where you are. And I think the power of my talk is, how do you compare? Where do you fit in? So let's take a quick peek here. This is Legume Haylage. This is coming from Dairyland Labs. And lots of numbers here. So hopefully you've printed this off and you can look at that at your leisure. Jim has highlighted 2 of them that are I think are particularly important. Here's NDF digestibility at 30 hours. A nice move. Take a look at the 5-year average. That's 2 points. That's huge. In my book, that's huge. That's going to allow us to get better digestibility and more value coming out of that legume haylage crop. And of course, we come down to the bottom. Here is your RFQ, and you can see again about 12 points sitting there as well. Remember, $1.09. And now we're talking money, as we say. Now we're talking real money here. Mike, that's 2 cases of average beer as far as that goes. A lot of times we do things on beer equivalent. Jim would suggest that some of you like to look at the curves here. So here's that same data. And he picked off what probably are the most important ones here. Protein doesn't change very much at this point, but look, you can see the nice move on the green curve, which is 2018 on RFQ, and of course that mimics the lower NDF and the higher NDF digestibility, and of course a lower UNDFD at 240 hours. So certainly that's just a nice graphic to show that data if that's more appealing to you. Another data set that we got from Dairyland Labs looked at mixed haylage, and again, same trend. So there's a boatload of numbers here, and if you want to get buried by numbers, at one time we had 30 slides of numbers, so you are not going to get stuck with 30 of them. And notice in the bottom down there, nice counts. For example, 2018 from Dairyland, all over 14,000 samples went into this count here, and you can see the 5-year average. And there's the graphics again, very similar, maybe a little smoother if you wish, but certainly put together very nicely by Dairyland Labs for your visual visual evaluation. Then let's take a look at Rock River. And one of the nice things in the Rock River database is that they split it out by East, Midwest, and Western regions up here. And now you got 2016, 17, and 18. And if you look on the East Coast or the East samples here, you can see a pretty interesting trend that we have lower protein compared to those of us in the Midwest and Western states here. And of course, as the protein went down, the NDF fiber went up. So a little more challenging crop situation on the East based on this data set from Rock River Lab. Let's then take a look at Cumberland Valley. Here's some of their data they sent. We got legumes and grasses listed up here. And again, you can take a look, and here for you statisticians, there's some standard deviations there to show you there is obviously variation that goes around these points here. The proteins look quite similar as far as that goes. The RFV a little bit higher. Remember, the other was RFQ, so there's a little difference there as well. I looked at the grasses when I was preparing for the webinar, and they're lower quality, no question about that. Mike, that may reflect a little bit maybe of the dry cow hay. Sometimes we're looking at these lower energy diets. So instead of using straws, for example, we're going to use grass. And there's some neat work out of University of Minnesota that says you can do that as well. Of course, that decad's a little concerning down there if you're going to look for close-up dry cows. So we'll take a look at that. Then we also had the silage that came in, and now you can see the grass silage really comes on much better. Again, you can see a vast improvement in NDFD here compared to our alfalfas here. So certainly this is probably intended for milk cows. The RFV, unfortunately, doesn't respond quite as nicely as we could, but that's one of the weaknesses we've had with RFV. Cumberland also gave us some small grain silages over here to take a look at, and you can see they range right around in the low teens on protein, and the fibers are modestly high. So again, another benchmark to say, well, where do you fit in? I thought, Mike, I would also share NRC data. This is the source of this information from the 2001. We think the new NRC will be out sometime in 2019 or 2020. And you can see most of these small grain forages, and these could be winter or they could be spring plantings as far as that goes. If you have some questions, don't be afraid to jump in and ask those questions. But in the teens, as you can see as well. And we have triticale, which is very popular now here in Illinois. Oats probably more in Wisconsin. A little bit of rye and barley, and of course a lot of wheat, because those farmers are looking at, they can take that as a wheat crop, and straw if they wish, and they make some decisions next spring when that crop comes into play. We also listed soybeans. Not a lot of action in soybeans this year because our crop made it this year. Some years when you got second crop soybean, these beans don't make it, and you can see it fits more like a legume, an average legume as far as that goes. Let's take a look at some corn silage. Again, this data coming in from Rock River Labs. Thank you very much. Here we got a 3-year spread, and you can again see the West basically doesn't have quite the quality of corn silage we have here in the East and the Midwest. Mike, maybe your slide showed that was some pretty tall corn they were chopping, and of course, as you pointed out, they're not high chopping either. We'll talk more about that a bit later because you'll see where that comes into play. And again, that's pretty much a trend, much like we did with the legume we saw earlier. The California usually does better on the alfalfa, where the corn silage a little bit lower. So you can kind of compare, depending where you're living, on where you fit. You can see here the averages, and the NDFs really mirror that protein. There's not much action there as far as that goes. We then went in and looked at this Cumberland Valley. You can see the timeline we have here, about 10,000 samples. So again, a big N, a big database as far as that goes. And again, you can see a pretty good corn silage, chopped a little bit on the drier side. My guess is as these samples keep coming in, as some of our questions have come in, this number is probably going to go up a little bit as far as that goes here. Be careful on this number down here. This is percent of NDF. So a lot of us look at percent of the dry matter. So you divide, excuse me, take 30% of the NDF here, and that gets you up around 11, 12%. So a little on the high side. You'll see here a bit later on UNDF 240 data for you here today. Kind of a neat slide, Mike, looking at starch yields and corn silage. And again, Cumberland Valley, this is September of 2018. And you can see some states have some horrendously big yields over here. Kind of humbling for us. You can see down here for starch content, we expect this to be around 34, 35. And so their labs, maybe all the good corn silage was sent to these other labs, but you can see Wisconsin looking better than us. And boy, that'll keep us crooks in Iowa and Illinois humble as far as that goes in the I states. But again, shows the variation, again, picks up on the California lower number sitting over here. And of course, here sits some of that drought challenge that Mike talked about a little bit earlier. So that's kind of an interesting map. You can kind of compare where you are and what happened out there on your farm. This is an interesting distribution, again, on that same database. This is NDF 30. The average is 56 with a fairly tight deviation, Jim. I was surprised. I thought it might be a little wider than that. And so you can kind of see kind of the old classic bell-shaped curve as far as that goes. I'm sure there's some BMR, some low lignin corn silages sitting out over here as well. This is all corn silage that came in that September window. Looking at the starch distribution, we already showed you on the map on it, the average here about 35%. And so you can see, even though the peak is at 30, or excuse me, at 40, we have a number of these samples here that dilute that down a little bit. So you can interpret that as you wish. Well, some of us are going to be buying drought stress corn silage. That could be due to such things as tar spot. It could be due to lodged corn or stressed. That could be anywhere, some mycotoxin to excess water, to drought-stressed corn. We saw the release on baling corn silage in Missouri in late July as far as that goes. Our take-home message is, here's your numbers, and tweak these at for your location. I'm going to use a 33% dry matter corn silage because the numbers come out very nicely at $40 a ton, which is a little bit high. So it means that comes out at 6 cents per pound of dry matter. So Jim put a visual together that says, here is my sample corn silage. If, for example, yours is going to be a lot drier this year because you can't get in the field to chop it, or it gets away from you, whatever the case, or the custom operator doesn't come, you can see if I've got this drier corn silage using that 6 cents a pound. And again, that has to be calculated locally. Now, this becomes worth about $48 a ton. Then you're going to go in once you've got this number and then adjust for starch. So if you're in Missouri and you're at 25% starch, you're going to drop that price down. And again, if you got some BMR, which is really high NDFD, then you're going to increase that. And these are my trigger numbers. It says when it's under 34% starch, I would make an adjustment. When it's over 57% NDFD, and if you want to put a plus or minus 1 or 2 points around that, that's your discussion. But I think there's going to be a lot of this going on because some of this damaged corn is going to have to come in as corn silage potentially, depending on inventory and where we're at. Certainly, Mike, you've already alluded to this factor, and here are all our challenges you nutritionists and you dairy farmers will face this year. Tar spots is out there. That used to be considered a cosmetic disease, but now it looks like, Mike, and maybe we'll have more discussion later on, it's going to have some impact on quality and yield, and we just don't have a good handle on it. A pathologist down and the University of Wisconsin and University of Illinois are really trying to get some handles on that. The mycotoxin risk is going to happen because of risk of flooding. Mike points out some of these ears are now starting to sprout, and that's going to be a problem as well. Mold development out there in field that can happen in the field and then enhanced in storage. High yeast counts can always be a problem. And then aflatoxin, for those of us who had some drought stress conditions, that can be a problem as well. So hopefully, Mike, we're going to see not too much of this. This is some pretty evil looking stuff over here, but this may be more true. I might see some more of these damaged kernels over here. And so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to look at the Magic 4. Now, there are a few more toxins you can look at. In fact, there's one company that does a 37+ screening for mycotoxins out there. But this is Dawn, and these numbers are what we use here at Illinois. Labs will have their set of numbers. If you get it tested, go to their website, see what they have. Wisconsin might be slightly different, but this would be Dawn in total ration dry matter. Another word is vomitox, as it relates more to the swine industry. And this is a total ration dry matter. Jim has highlighted this as parts per million. Here's your aflatoxin 20 parts per billion. That is an FDA number. Theoretically, that feed cannot be shipped across state lines. Theoretically, it should not be fed. At this level here in the total ration dry matter, there's a chance you're going to be shut off the milk market because cows excrete about 1 to 2%, in some cases 3% of the aflatoxin into their milk. And I know our major co-op is always screening for that as well. And there comes your T2 toxin. That's a bugger of a one. And here sits zearalenone. These are all parts per million. Remember, this is total in the total ration dry matter. Should you test for these? The answer is, well, what I'm doing is I go to my favorite labs here in the Midwest and ask, what are you seeing coming in? Usually those are suspect samples, and the cost of this testing, some of these labs will get you a nice package deal, but you're probably looking at anywhere from $60 to $100 for a package of 4 tests here. And now the big question, Mike, is how good is your sample? It only takes a few bad kernels, for example, in a corn sample to trigger one of these tests. So that's perhaps the biggest concern I have. And I would not be testing the TMR. I'd be looking at individual suspected feed samples on the farm. There are 2 basic type of binders out there. Legally, I got to call them flow agents. FDA still has not, in my knowledge, has not changed the terminology. Flow binders. You have those that are going to work primarily for aflatoxin, and these are the clay-based binders, and these are the different names you might run across on your tags when you look at mycotoxin binders. The other one, of course, are the yeast cell wall products, or like that. Algae fits into that category as well. You'll find them listed sometimes as yeast cell wall extracts or moss or glutamannins as far as that goes. Again, these are more effective in what I call the wet or cold. So, Mike, probably in the Midwest, we're going to see more of these dudes. Missouri, parts of Kansas, as you pointed out, maybe more interested over here. Some of the companies do a combo as far as that goes. This is 10 grams. Most companies will jack that up to 20 or 30 grams to see if they get a cow response. Cow response could include dry matter intake, fecal consistency, milk production. Those things would might respond modestly quick at this point. Interesting, Hoards Dairyman always does a market survey, and this last year, the market survey, Abby, 25% of your readers were adding mycotoxin binders, and that was in 2017. 2018, that number, especially with the challenges we're seeing now, might even go a bit higher. Okay, next, chopping corn silage, and we're going to get ready to wind this thing down here pretty quick. Here's a really beautiful visual showing, comes from the Kloss people, and you can see this is 5 millimeters, so depending on how you got your chopper set up, we're going to get that 5 millimeter length, and you can see now we have our hockey pucks coming in there, and all, you can see plant parts, leaf material, all at 5 millimeter, pretty precise chopping as we go in. Here comes your processor. We're going to crush those particles, and so as we come through here, you're going to see them pop up in front of you here. And now you can see, and I would like now that to be down around 1 millimeter. In fact, my good farmers say they'll tighten them as much as they can so they click. You can see we really smash that corn kernel. We're going to rip up that corn plant there as well. And here comes your cob, your hockey puck coming through there. We're going to crush that, and we're going to get that cob small enough so the cows can't sort against it. And that might increase digestibility, although the data there is pretty slight. So Jim, let's open up our last our last polling question. And now we have choices. I'm kind of curious to see this answer here. My listeners out there, you know, there are 3 boxes out there. NASCO sells all 3 of them. The 3-box system, that's the old system that I have. The newest system is the second one down. You have the 4 millimeter box. If you're going to buy one, that's the one you probably want to buy. Then you got the 1 millimeter box. I would not buy that one unless you want to use a 1 millimeter screen for doing dry corn on your farm. Then the 4th choice, you don't use the system there, or you use a different one. The Z box that was developed by the Japanese and Minor Institute would be an example of that as well. So the polls are opening, and our time is going to be tight here. So Jim, we're going to go ahead and close the poll off at about 50%. And you can see that we have about 20% of the people are not using a Penn State box. I really think that's a mistake, to be very honest with you, as far as that goes. And you can see the 3-box system, because most of you are like me, we're pretty tight. We were staying with the 3-box system. I have the most comfort with that one. And you can see, I just want to be clean, to our listeners that there are different boxes out there and they have different numbers. And so we're going to close that off and we're going to click on that. And these are the numbers that come from Penn State. And you can look at that at your leisure. Perhaps the number that catches your attention here, we've really backed these numbers down. And that's a sorting issue. I know one nutritionist I saw at Expo, he says he didn't care if that's zero. I haven't quite gone to zero yet, but you can see our TMRs are really backed off. This would be your functional fiber in your feed stuff. We know these are certainly going to be functional fiber. People are throwing that one in there as well. And here's some data that comes from Cumberland Valley, and these are 65 samples that they processed this year. And you can see this is corn silage, and you can see those numbers pretty much match up pretty nicely as well. Here's the kernel processing score this last year, about a 63. More about that right now. Dairyland Labs shared this with me. This is 1,500 samples from Dairyland Labs. Here's your corn silage processing score. You want to be, in a perfect world, you want to be over 70. About a quarter of the farmers in last year, last cropping year 2017, got excellent. You can see 11% did a poor job. Dr. Shaver, Wisconsin, suggests 2 pounds more milk going from brown to blue and another 2 pounds of milk going from blue to green. So this becomes a very powerful tool. Next, we're going to look at fecal starch, again, coming from Dairyland Labs, 244 samples. The good news, this number is going up. I think it's a useful test. And you can see about 20% of the samples would be concerned. Now, this starch could come from corn silage, could come snaplage, could from dry corn, could from high moisture corn, could from barley, could from small grain silages if you were harvesting it late. So just be careful. We like to see that number below 5%. And the green, the Packer green, we won't go into that right now, obviously, but the Packer green you can see should be under 2% if we get it done right. Another powerful tool that we now have is the UNDF, undigestible neutral detergent fiber. And these are important because if it's too low, we don't have enough room and function there. And that is 0.3% of the cow's body weight. So that would be if you got a 1,400 pound cow, about 4.2 pounds. Once if it gets too high, then the room will get filled up and it doesn't move out. And that's your 0.4% again from the Minor Institute. And that would get you somewhere around 6 pounds. Here is Larry Jones's number. And I like this number, 6.2 pounds of forage UNDF. For you Europeans, that would be 2.8 kilograms, and that is UNDF 30, and this is for Holstein cows. Jerseys, obviously, would be lower. This is forages. We don't have a good feel of what to do with fuzzy cottonseed, soy hulls. I think they're going to be zeroed out because they're ground up and pelleted. Citrus pulp depends on particle size, beet pulp, all come into play. Take-home message. Dairy farmers listening, what is your number today? And when you go to new crop silages that may be coming into in the next several months, what will that number change to? Another PowerPoint that comes from some data. This is UNDF 240 from, again, Dairyland Labs. And now you can see here's your BMR corn silage. That number sits around 6%, 7, 8%. Here's your other corn silage up around 11, 12%. That's exactly what the Cumberland Valley showed to us. Here you can see the alfalfa, and Mike, maybe we're hammering it too hardly. The newer varieties and hybrids and lower lignin alfalfas, we expect that to move over a little bit. And here sits your small grains, and you can see some of the harvested correctly can really smoke. And then, of course, we have straw sitting out over here. So a wide range of numbers. What does this slide say? Well, are you raising the right crops and the right hybrids for your dairy cows? Here's the last tool we'll take a look at, and that is your fermentation profiles. This comes from Wisconsin and Delaware, and you can see if you got it fermented properly with an inoculant. Here you can see the dry matter ranges, the pHs, the various acids that we'd be looking at here, especially for my corn silages. You can see my legumes are a little bit lower at this point. You get a little more nervous with butyric acid sitting here with an unfortunate fermentation over here. If you get over here in your high moisture corn, you could be in the whiskey business and start making ethanol. And of course, a nice table to answer the question, did you ferment it properly and did your inoculant really help you out? Well, our time is about gone, so let's go through this very quickly. Hang on to your hats. We're going to go into high gear and take a look at feed metrics here. This is Sesame 2014, and that includes amino acid value as well. Anything in green is goodbye. So shell corn, you can see this is the current price. That could actually be lower. coming out of the field, break-even price based on all the feeds that we're looking at. So shell corn, corn silage, sorry, Mike, your good alfalfa gets hammered here a little bit, and of course, corn stalk and straw are in the green as well. Here comes your byproduct feeds, and you can see they're all in the green, green and gold. Soy hulls is the only one that is not in the green. One of the first times, Mike and Jim, we've seen fuzzy cottonseed priced in well at this point. What surprises me is look at this, folks. You can see distillers grain and corn gluten feed in September pricing out just about the same price, 30% protein with lots of bypass methionine, corn gluten feed, 18% protein. Oh, wow, pretty interesting stuff. So here's my prices, and here the question is, here in the Midwest, you folks in California and Europe, you can't use this, but here are the prices I'm going to plug into my budgets. I will walk you through it. Here's my example. So in my example, it's going to cost me, Mike, about $2 for forages this year, but I'm cheating. This is 2/3 corn silage, 1/3 alfalfa, could be baleage, could be whatever a form you want to go with. It could be hay or haylage. Byproducts, you can see I've got here that half fuzzy cottonseed, half corn gluten. I might take that gluten out now. Protein products, you can see right now, this is half distillers, half soybean meal, 50 pounds of dry matter, $4.57. Every consultant, every farmer should have that number, because then I come to the big, what I call the big four. Here's my 9 cents per pound of dry matter. Can you beat me? And that fits here in the Midwest. Penn State, you're going to be a little bit higher. California, you're going to be a lot higher. Feed cost per hundredweight under $6. Here is $16 milk. This needs to be $18 milk for Illinois. So that my income or feed cost is $10. And then feed efficiency. This is pounds of 3.5 fat corrected milk per pound of dry matter, 1.6. What's the other take-home message? Well, milk price is low. Mike, that's why we have lots of milk in the Midwest in the United States. And that is because if you back off on milk yield, all these numbers go the wrong direction. So there's our take-home messages, and I think we're in good shape time-wise, Mike. And at this point, you can read those at your leisure. We really try to stress that both in the M&M or the Mike and Mike presentation here today. And with that, Abby, we'll turn it back to you for some comments.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you both for that very timely presentation. A lot of information to take in, and I think for our crop producers and our dairy producers to think about as we're finishing up this harvest season. Also want to thank Kuhn for sponsoring the session. Once again, we really greatly appreciate their support of the program, and please feel free to check them out online if you want to learn more about their company. To view this webinar again, or any of our previous webinars, you can visit our archives, and they can be found at www.hoards.com/webinars. Also, all of you attending will receive an email survey later this week. So please take the opportunity to evaluate the presentation and give us some ideas for future topics. On the screen right now, you'll see some future presentations. Hard to believe that we have reached the final 2 presentations of 2018 already. The year is just flying by. In November, on the 12th, we will have a presentation by Larry Trainell from the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Group. He will be presenting a topic titled Economics and User Experiences with Automated Milking. So that will focus on robotic milking, a survey that they've done in the Midwest, and some of the things that they've learned from working closely with producers using robotic milking. That presentation will be sponsored by Cargill. We thank them for that. Then looking ahead to December, we will have a presentation, Cutting Feed Costs Without Cutting Milk. And that will be presented by a very popular speaker of ours, Bill Weiss from the Ohio State University. And that presentation will be sponsored by QLF, Quality Liquid Feeds. So please mark your calendars to attend either or both of those webinars as we move to the upcoming months. Mike, were there some questions from the audience that you and Mike could answer at this time?
We sure do, Abby. In fact, as your listeners know, you can send questions ahead, and we had 2 of them that came in earlier this weekend, and so let's address those, and then we'll pick up the ones that just have come in just now. This question addresses it to me, but Mike, you can jump in as well. And he says, "What do you think about corn gluten meal to be used in high-producing lactating cow rations?" It's a fine feedstuff. But here. Remember, I'm Dutch, so be careful. Corn gluten meal using sesame, the sesame in September. The market price for corn gluten meal was $480 a ton. The break-even price was $491 a ton. So it's probably kind of trading dollars. That's not really economical there. But I look at it as competing with distillers grains, and if you remember that one, the market price on corn distillers $145 and break-even price $204. So it's a much better buy. It'd be lower in protein, but both of them are going to have bypass with them, and both are going to bring some methionine to the party. So I think to me it's all economics. The second question came in, and that is how often doing a nutrient analysis on byproduct or co-product feeds to address variability in those products, coming in from Rick. And I think I will ask two questions for Rick. The first one is, are you buying it directly, or are you going through a company or broker? Because if you're coming through a company or broker, they should have that information for you. However, if you are buying it directly from the plant where it's being produced, then the other question I'm going to ask is, well, how long does that semi-load of feed last? Now, if it lasts for 3 months or 3 weeks, you might want to get it tested so you know where you're at. But if it's gone, then the question is, well, by the time you get your answer back, if you got that semi-load of wet byproduct gone in 3 days, what are you going to do? What are you going to do other than sulk about it? Certainly, but I would test it enough so you have a handle to know what kind of quality control is coming out of that plant. So I think you do want to have a handle on that one as well. So I think that takes care of those questions. And now, Mike, we had a question that came in here. Lots of hay to buy, but very little high quality out there in the Midwest. Is it the same all over the United States? Comes from one of our folks from Iowa.
Yeah, I think that's something that we see every year to some degree, and probably this year more so. And I think that's just a reflection of the amount of rainfall that many areas got this summer. And at this point, I don't know what you really do about it. I think there's you're going to have to figure out ways to maybe use some of this lower quality hay or average quality hay in situations where you maybe didn't before, and adjust rations accordingly. I don't know what if you have some comments there on the feeding side, but it's certainly true. There is a lot more average quality stuff out there than high quality stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike, and I think your nutritionist is going to have to decide, can he sneak some of that lower quality stuff into rations? There are a number of different groups of animals on the farm that he might be able to sneak it into as far as that goes. Our computer says it's a pretty good deal compared to some of the really high quality feed. But remember, my computer just looks at the nutrient. So it doesn't say, will it increase dry matter intake, will increase rumen fermentation profile, will increase butterfat test, and a good alfalfa can do all three of those as far as that goes as well. Here's another question. It says there's still a lot of corn to chop here in western Wisconsin. Unfortunately, it's gotten dry with all the rain we had, and we can't get our equipment into the field. Any recommendations to try to preserve this lower than optimal moisture corn silage crop? I have 3 of them, Mike, and you can jump in as well. I would chop it short. In other words, I'm going to go down to probably 1/2 inch theoretical length of chop, because I want to really be able to pack it. What really scares me is to get that doggone stuff to ferment, especially when you start getting over 40% dry matter. So I'm going to chop it short, maybe even 3/8 of an inch. If push comes to shove and you can't pack it, even 1/4 of an inch, which means now you may have to look at alternate forages to maintain good rumen function as far as that goes. I'm going to process the daylights out of it. I'm going to destroy any corn kernels in there, because they're going to be hard like BBs. So I don't want to see them twice in the manure, and then put in a really good inoculant that hopefully will help drive the fermentation process. Mike, any other tips you would like to add to this one?
Yeah, I would just add one more. I think that's the kind of corn where you don't want to be looking at high chop corn, because there's a lot of the moisture is in that lower stalk. And so if you want to raise the moisture, cut it a little bit lower, and that'll increase the moisture of the overall crop. If you've got to feed a little more of this cheap grain corn out there for your starch or whatever, do that. But if you're looking at raising moisture, cut it low.
Here's one question for you, Mike. It says that 7.09 pounds of alfalfa hay is very low for a dairy cow. You told California dairymen are feeding this small amount of alfalfa. Is there any bad effects from feeding this amount of alfalfa in terms of long-term removal of alfalfa from the diet? I'm thinking he may be looking at soil aspects. Your comments?
Well, from a soil standpoint, that's a whole different discussion. I think anytime you have alfalfa in your crop rotation, it's certainly a benefit from a soil perspective. They're out in California, they're looking at other feedstuffs for physically effective fiber and those kinds of things. They feed a lot of byproduct feeds, also a lot of corn silage, and that corn silage has a fair amount of fiber in it as well. But they're looking at it and they're feeding at that level mostly just from a cost perspective.
Okay, and I can't see your face, Mike, but I would say I think California's finally got it right. When we look at our diets here with about 2/3 corn silage, which in this 7 or 8 pounds of hay would be just right on the money as far as utilization of the nitrogen and building balanced rations and getting the amino acids right. So I think California is there's some advantages to that other than the great comments you had. Here's an easy answer.
What I was just going to say one more thing. Most of the alfalfa in California is harvested as dry hay, not haylage, and so that's a big difference out there as well compared to the Northeast or Midwest, for example.
Very good, Mike. Next question, very straightforward. Mycotoxin levels expressed on a dry matter base, you betcha. They are expressed on a dry matter base and in total ration dry matter. So that's where you want to be sure if you're working with your labs as far as that goes. The next question has to do with what do you think? Do you think yeast wall extracts really absorb DON? Yes, I do. Not all cell walls are the same, though. Companies have pointed out that some cell walls some of the yeast cell walls are modified. They are processed to make them more available to tie up the DON. It is my understanding that they do tie up the DON or the mycotoxin and move it out of the system so it cannot be absorbed as far as that goes. Do you use them commonly as routine toxin binder? And I am within a 1/10 of an inch of adding to my magic list of 6. So I'm very close because I think there's no room for risks for mycotoxins. And boy, this year, I think unless you are living in God's country and have none of these risks that Mike pointed out to you, I would be adding it in, and I'd be adding it at this stage of the game. The question I think is for you as I read it here, with this high growing degree days early and wet weather late, how mandatory is the check corn silage and snappage for mycotoxins? Well,
I think anytime because of weather, you deem there's a risk factor there, it's just good insurance to see what you've got. I mean, that's true with any feed stuff for that matter. So I certainly would bite the bullet and get some tests done.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I would also look at that, especially look for signs of, and I know this is tough, but look for signs of damage in the corn silage, evidence of mold, discoloration of the corn and that, and then stay in touch with your labs to see what they're seeing coming in, because they're a great bellwether as far as that goes. The last two,
and I think too, the mycotoxins, especially the DON, that's going to show up in a lot of feeds, and certainly in a lot of corn silage. So just because it's there, it may not be causing you a problem, and it may not be at levels that it's going to cause you a problem. But don't be surprised if you don't, if it doesn't come back positive at some level.
Okay, here's the last two questions, and we can take care of them very quickly. Ionophores. My nutritionist is not a fan. I'm sorry. I'm a big fan of ionophores. I think it really fits. It really works as far as that goes, not only for growing heifers and calves, but also for my dry cows and milk cows. I think we just have to go there as far as that goes. And our levels of monensin, which of course is the name, this question just came in here. We're looking at our fresh cows, somewhere around 400 milligrams per cow per day in my fresh cows, and certainly stay around that 300, 350. These are Holsteins, of course. That's the number we'd like to stay with. The higher levels look like it has some beneficial effects in terms of blood ketones and dry matter intake. So that's kind of our magic number. If you had to have a one number, I'd be close to 400 for my lactating cows, 200, 225, 300 for my dry cows. Quick question, should I put the alfalfa from California in a TMR or feed it separately? I'm going to put it in my TMR. Don't damage it too badly, but get it down to at least 1 inch in length. And I don't want those cows having to make a choice, because if my cows back in Wisconsin on our dairy farm, they thought alfalfa hay was pretty good stuff, and they would always eat that first. And I'm not going to let them sort that out and get the job done. And the last question is, and Mike, you may want to jump in on that one as well, a brand name on yeast cell wall products. Well, I think there's 5 or 6 of them that are quite good out there. So check with your supplier, ask for the data on it as far as that goes, and that's where I'd go from there. Mike, any closing comments on the questions we just went through?
No, I think that that pretty well wraps it up. Just make a comment that you talked a little bit about cereal forages, and one of my impressions going around the U.S. is that, this is something from dairy cow rations that I think, we need to continue to look at and evaluate, because there's a lot more cereal forages being fed to dairy cows across the U.S., not just in one particular area.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, and that's could be another whole seminar, is cover crops. I think there's a tremendous opportunity here, and why we sit here in southern Illinois, letting our land bare, and we could put in winter wheat in there and get all the benefits of cover crop, take it off early in the spring if I'm a livestock producer, as feed stuff. I can go full season corn on top of it, and I can double dip that land and bring some neat things to the forefront as well. Well, Abby, I think we'll wind it up here. We got all the questions answered, Jim. I think we're home free at this one. Abby, we'll let you wind it up.
Great job going through all those questions. Thank you, people in the audience, for submitting them. One more time, I'd like to thank Poon for their support of this webinar. And then also thank you to both of our presenters, Mike Hutjens and Mike Rankin, for covering the current crop situation and some recommendations as we move into the next winter here. Last but not least, I would like to thank all of you, the listeners who are out there. It's really our goal to provide information that's useful to you on your dairies or while you're working with clients. And we are very thankful that you take the time to join us for these monthly webinars. So we hope you may come along again and participate in one of these future webinars that are listed on the screen. And again, we will be doing the same series in 2019 with a whole new set of topics and presenters. So please watch for more information as those topics are released. Until next time, when we meet again in November, I'd like to say goodbye from all of us here at Hoards Dairyman and the University of Illinois.